Hey everyone, and welcome to Maybe Muslim. I'm Mariam Haider, producer and host of the podcast, and in this episode, I'm in conversation with Nusrat Jafri, author of the memoir This Land We Call Home. In this book, Nusrat traces her maternal history going back to her great grandfather, who was originally part of the Bhantu tribe and later adopted Christianity as a way to overcome the ostracization imposed upon him and his family for belonging to what the British deemed as, in quotes, criminal tribes. Nusrat's book subsequently offers a window into the lives and choices of her grand aunts, who, with the help of Christian missionaries' efforts, got access to education and opportunities to become the first women to study in boarding schools, have varied career choices, travel abroad, marry or not by their own choices, and in effect become role models for her. She also writes about her mother Meera, born in the year of India's independence, who also carved a path of her own, fell in love with a Muslim man, decided to convert to Islam, and effectively raised Nusrat and her siblings in a Muslim household. This conversation takes a deeper dive into Nusrat's years growing up in a cultural milieu where the term conversion was not a loaded one, and where being a Muslim came with a space to ask questions to arrive at one's own answers. We talk about many layers of this Muslim identity, including gender, caste, class, and how one carries their Muslimness in the world and country we find ourselves today. Do give this episode a listen and share it with your friends, family, and loved ones. Hey Nusrat, welcome to Maybe Muslim podcast. It is so exciting to see you and finally have you here.
Thank you so much for having me here. It's my absolute honor.
I am, as I said earlier, I'm very excited for your book, and I think it is a very important book. I was waiting for it, and when it came out, I think I had a sense of where you wanted to talk about, what you want to talk about. You had mentioned in some of your earlier, before the book was launched, that this is going to talk about caste and conversions. But reading the book, I realized that it was so much more than that. It was about women's histories, it was about family lineages, it was about the multiplicity of stories and influences that make who we are. And for that, I feel it's a really important book. How do you feel now that the book is out in the world and you have readers sharing all their thoughts with you?
I feel really good, and I mean the way you described it is really what it is. It was more than caste conversions and identity, and I'm so happy that you've picked up these other things because they are not just layers. They are what I've actively intended to do. But when we are like writing blurbs or things about the book, we don't mention everything that's there. But so at sometimes I was feeling it's limiting my categories, so to speak. And I was only hoping that people would like really read and go and not just think that, oh, this is a book about caste, or this is a book about conversions, or like writing about India's history parallelly to a family history. It's also a done trope. It's not something that I've that's unique to my book. But these things about feminism, feminist history within families, again, this is not a unique story, I'm sure, but it's out there, and so many people are reading and identifying with it and thinking, yes, my grandmother or my dadi was the first one to do this, or a friend actually thought about a Muslim friend went ahead and actually thought about their family history and how they came about to uh, converting when they did initially, because most of the population of Muslims in India are converted. So it was interesting how it kind of planted a little seed of wanting to know about your own family history. So it's very satisfying. And when people tell me that they identified with something, I'm actually very impressed with how that something is different for everyone else. It's not the same for because there is no one central theme. Which, by the way, when I was writing the book, I was thinking, am I going in many directions? So, but it was nice to have my editor and my agents kind of reinforcing uh, just removing all kinds of self doubt and just telling me, go ahead with it. It's fine. It's totally in the right direction. So, yeah, it feels incredibly satisfying to answer your question.
It was an incredibly satisfying read. Like I said, like I speed read through it, and I was drawn to so many aspects of it, like I was curious to understand how you were explaining and exploring this multi-layered generational history. And at the same time were not ready to sit with easy answers. A lot of times I think that happens, that when we are looking at our own personal histories, there is this attachment to make sure that we come out with comfortable stories, come out with stories that don't hurt anyone else, that don't rub the wrong way, you know
Yes.
and I found there was so much courage and clarity as you were putting stories about your aunts and their histories and their choices, your grandmother's choice and effectively your mother's choice. I think at some point I was gonna, even imagine, I was like, I would love to even have an interaction with your mom, sit with her, because it's like they're carrying so much for us to learn and understand life from. It's almost like they're portals of that knowledge. So you've kind of captured all of that in a book, and that is just incredible. I think just continuing with that, Nusrat, like you went through your maternal family history. Can you give us a bit of understanding of your relationship with your own grandmother and your aunts, and how did that influence your understanding about religion, about caste, and how did you sit with it as you started now putting it all together in a text for the world to be part of it?
So there was a lot of openness about my parents' interfaith marriage. So I mean, I have friends like who opened up about their parents' inter-religion marriages to me much later, like much later, once they felt comfortable that they could perhaps. Because, so that's the trend that I've observed. People don't usually talk of conversions because conversions somewhere down the line in Indian history has become a very loaded word, and it denies adults agency. Like you can't imagine an adult man or a woman converting for whatever reason. There's always a little bit of coercion or a tacit, something was must have been there. A lot of people, even like some people very close to me, were not willing to believe that my mother was attracted to the faith. That attraction may have come because she fell in love with a Muslim man, and that she wanted to wholehearted. People do these things in love. Why? When did we become such cynics that we were like, "Kaise ho sakta hai?" So the openness about different faiths and cultures was always there. So there was never this one moment where I realized that, oh, we are different from that my maternal side is practicing another faith, and we do something else in our house. But there were fun times, like I've written, I think, in the book as well, like going to church with cousins when we were in there, when we were staying with them on vacations, and for me wanting to have the communion bread and being denied that because I wasn't baptized, and I would feel like, oh God, as if all I wanted to do was convert to Christianity just that day in church so that I could get to taste the bread. And my cousins would describe it like, this sweet thing that melts on your tongue. And, I'm sure they were also overplaying it because we couldn't. And once we even almost managed to reach up to the pastor, but then suddenly our school matron appeared from somewhere and pulled us apart gently and said, "No, not for you guys." And we were like, but yeah, there was. From my grandmother and uh, from my mamus, there was an exposure to a very different culture, which was really very different from my paternal side, and not equating one to the other. I mean, just they were just different cultures, and in my house they were coexisting, like they were both flowing freely. So I was aware of the uniqueness of our house, like from my other classmates and friends and people who were from endogamous families, and So we understood that there's something different happening here. But my parents always had this big pride in their love story. It was not one to be hidden, or like people would suddenly realize Meera Bhabhi was. My mom never changed her name from Meera, so they just assumed that it wasn't like a shy thing for her to accept in front of people that she converted some after shadi. So yeah, I've been incredibly lucky like that. But caste was, I mean, because of my privilege, I never had any exposure to caste. But that's really because, as I realized after growing up, that Islam in India also adheres to a caste system, caste class, and we were privileged and sayyads, and that is why maybe I did not have any exposure to it, because we were not on the receiving end of that discrimination. So that's a realization that came to me much later, yeah, much later, after when I was well in, like, in college or something. And I remember going into deep debates with people. You grow up, right? You're not always politically aware. And I would check people who would say, but there's caste system in Muslims as well. I'm saying, no, everyone's equal before Allah, because it's a very bookish things. In practice, that equality should also translate in society, right? That wasn't happening. So yes, that's something I had to read into and unlearn, and like open my uh, understanding of how things are practiced in the Indian subcontinent. In my mother also did not have exposure to caste, because uh, if you've read Sujata Gidla's Ants Among Elephants, you would have known about the very very strong caste system within the Christian community in South India, including having different churches for Mala Christians. So, but this was not there in North India. Caste would follow you maybe in certain things, as I've mentioned in the book, but it's not like a different church. It's not a predominant conversation. So my mother was also shielded from that. So that was our privilege. About shaping identity, as you said, how did this so I was born after my grandfather had passed. So I had heard stories about my grandmother, my nanny's resilience, and how she brought everyone up even when he was alive. Just because of his addiction, and how she managed to just keep the family together. So I always saw her as a very very strong woman, and I always saw my mother as a very strong woman as well. I had heard stories of my great grand aunts, my grandmother's sisters, and as it's mentioned, their stories are there in the book as well. These are women in 1920s, 1930s, who were career oriented women, and they didn't marry out of choice in some places. And it's just a different kind of feminism. I mean, a feminism, of course, but a different kind of social, what do you say, positioning of women in their family, where uh, everyone was equal, everyone had agency and the freedom to choose what they wanted to do. And they built their lives around freedoms, and they also fought for more. So I saw that, and I was absolutely in awe of these women. I may have met three of them, one very closely, Dorothy, Kali, but the other two I just remember vaguely having met them because I was younger. And so yeah, I was really, and my own aunts are again incredibly independent women driving scooters in Lucknow at a time when women were not even venturing out. So I've always had very strong women in the house. So my sisters and I have grown up with that sense of independence and a different strong identity of our own.
I think that comes out brilliantly, the strength of the women in your family and the generations in your family. And like I said earlier, I would have loved to, like, in my head, I was like, I would have loved to interact with all these women, that you mentioned, and in a way, and again, you've mentioned this in the book, like education was that vehicle
Yeah.
that effectively led them to also claim their own freedoms, claim their life choices, in at a time when that was not the norm.
Yeah.
It was, so that's kind of an incredible sort of upbringing to be around, actually. To have these stories as part of your years of growing and recognizing, um, of choices, recognition of choices that one could make. And there are multiple threads coming out from what you said, but I will go back to how you very beautifully explained that, the love story between your parents and their choice of being together was really so foundational, in your home, and the fact that your mom did not change her name. I think you also kind of encapsulate that in the book, where you talk about how Islam, or having been part of a Muslim household, both your parents had very different takes of it. Your dad came from this place of logic and reasoning, and your mom had adapted this religion, and her bent was more driven towards exploration. And I'm really curious as how did this inform your sense of Muslimness, and associating with the faith, and if you'd like to share something along those lines.
So like when you have a parent who was born into this religion and another who came into it of her own will and learning. One of them is more enthusiastic than the other. And she's also like, oh, my children should learn everything all at once types. And my father was more like, there's a time for everything and we can do things in stages as well. But my Muslimness, so to speak, is actually like a amalgamation of both their fervor in religion and how they looked at it. My father was very clear that we should be concentrating on academics to begin with, because he again thought that education is the key for everything else. And while my mother obviously also believed in the same virtue of education, but she also thought that there should be a little more push and in like teaching us more rituals, so to speak. So both my parents were ardent believers. Both practiced Islam, like doing the daily namaz and everything. But we also had, because of my father, I think, and how he looked at everything analytically, we had the freedom to question a lot of things which I know some of my paternal cousins did not have. So blindly accepting things was not, which was, I mean, we could question. We could question a certain ritual. So blindly following rituals was not something that I was into. For example, um, when we were talking earlier, you had said that when you are the only Muslim in your classroom, you're expected to give all kinds of answers to students from a majority community. That load, I think, every Muslim child in India is exposed to very early in their lives. So why do you guys beat your chest and do self-flagellation
Mm.
in in Muharram? That's one question that I had to answer, and I also didn't understand why, because in my family we were just beating our chests, men also, women also. For us, Matam was that. But I also went to Old Lucknow once and once or twice, and I went and I attended the Ashura events there and saw people walking on fire, which is also something I think can be done scientifically if you don't spend too much time and walk. But like using knives and using kama on your head, that's something I struggled with, because I like my father would also explain to me that beating chests, walking on fire is okay. I mean, you that much of mourning and showing a visual representation of your loss for Imam Hussein and his family is enough. But the extra things I would struggle to understand. But my father would answer these questions, explain. He wouldn't shoo me off. Even my mother. So, and all the other things like Shia families have nazar, which I don't know what the English word would be. Benedictions. I don't know, for the dead, when you are praying, you put a shama.
Yeah, I've never been able to translate that for in any. Yeah, yeah.
Nazar, no? Yeah. So when we do.
Yeah.
So you put a it's very ritualistic, no? It's very non majority Islamic
Mhm.
in many ways, right? It's a
Yeah.
Shia ritual of sorts. So I found that very beautiful. I would love setting up these things. So it was it was like finding what you like, what you question, and overlapping and intersecting areas, but still having the freedom to, come to something that where you could settle and say, this is what it is for me. So I would say, because of my parents, I got the opportunity to ask questions and also explore Islam, like my stand on hijab or my stand on Bakri. That's one other area where half my life has gone in explaining to people that it's a ritual. And again, as when you're growing up, you also you have uh, you have a Muslim identity, and you have to have a little Muslim, but a little one more word that describes your Muslimness. Are you a fundamental Muslim? Are you a liberal Muslim? So you are finding your tags. So when you're young, you're like, no, no, I have to be a liberal. I will say these things. And when you're growing older and you start finding your voice and you start reading and researching on by yourself as well, then you find, like, you'll find a way of talking about, again, I'll come to hijab, the issue, the Indian issue of hijab. You'll find your voice there and you won't want to do it black and white anymore, because there are so many layers to these things and nothing is not political in India anymore. So yeah, my I would say that all my Muslimness is also my politicalness now. I can't separate these two anymore, and I refuse to speak only in like, this is right, this is wrong. And it's true for Muslims globally right now, no? Like,
Yeah, 100%. And to the point you were saying that uh, you you're asked these questions by other people, and you are supposed to be answerable or figure out answers for them, or the fact that people will come to you and be like, oh, why do you flagellate yourself? Or uh, you know I used to have these questions so many times, like, रमजान में पानी भी नहीं पीते, पानी भी नहीं पी सकते, every year that
every
Ramzan.
single year.
And I would just grow so tired of it that I mean, at that point, I think I felt it was also my personality where I was not comfortable with that much like interrogation. So I also felt like I should just have the right answer, the right explanation. But as an adult, I realized that actually, I mean, there are two things. One, there is so much Islamophobia, like, which has always been there in the society, where um, the question is not coming from a place of curiosity. The question is coming from a place of already established and understanding of it, saying that कुछ तो यहाँ गड़बड़ है, इन लोग like backward हैं या जो भी कह लो, and then you have to somehow make it contemporary for them. So that was one. And I think the other element was also this sort of internalized uh, questioning of not knowing how to navigate this territory, because you are not you've never been given a space where it would be very open to just be like not having all the answers, or you can be very comfortable with saying, I don't know, मुझे नहीं पता. For some reason पता होना चाहिए. And so I had this, like, literally, I think for all my school life and even my early years, it was just so it was just so all eyes on you when Ramzan comes, suddenly, or anything like Bakr Eid, like you said, like, I have to supposed to constantly explain Bakr Eid to people,
Yeah.
and it was so tiring. And I think I completely understand when you say this, because it is a lot of majoritarian problem to want to have the minorities answer the question that they have a problem on.
Yeah.
It's their problem. They need to seek answers and they need to figure out the answers.
Yeah. Like I was telling someone, I'll just add to your thought.
Yeah, yeah.
that for the past 30 or 35 years, I've been answering the same question to people. ये मीठी ईद है कि बकरी ईद है?
Oh
Come
my God.
on, it's general knowledge, है ना? Wouldn't
Huh.
you? And we, I know we are a minority in this country, but we participate in festivals, all kinds of festivals with good josh. No, from our
Yeah.
childhood, we've all been. Unless you're living in a ghetto जहाँ माहौल ही नहीं है, but otherwise if you're living in a non-ghetto colony, you will always participate in most of the festivals, and you know. So likewise, is general knowledge to know which Eid and what is the story behind Bakri Eid, and what's the story behind, any of our other customs and rituals.
I like on that note, so this happened only once, thankfully. But when I was growing up, we used to have a public holiday for Ashura.
Yeah,
And usually in those years that I was growing up, Ashura was, I think, always during March. For a few years, it was like exam period के
yeah,
आसपास. So it would be like a big relief कि in final exam के time पे छुट्टी हो गई.
yeah.
बीच में like public holiday. And I had, oh my God, I had a friend of mine call me wishing me happy
Oh,
Muharram.
that happened always well into my college.
Oh my God. And this is Ashura. So like my phone rings like landline tha, and then my mom tells me this person has called. And I'm like, okay. And I quick and she's like, oh, and she's so excited and she's waiting as a Eid. And I'm just like, okay. Like I don't know. I mean, I can probably forgive her for the fact that so internet was still like very early stages of it or whatever. But
Yeah.
yeah, like this kind of
It's like
ignorance was
Good
so
Friday.
prevalent.
Happy Good
Huh, exactly.
Friday.
Happy Good Friday, like Happy Good Friday, you'd wish somebody.
Yeah,
It's crazy. Um, but yeah, I think there's a lot to kind of go deeper here in terms of how our own sense of belonging was constantly questioned in very small ways, subtle ways, and I do want to kind of think about like how did that play out in understanding who we are as Indian Muslims. I think you raised a very important point, which is like this hyphenated Muslim identity, where you're supposed to
yeah.
establish that you are a liberal Muslim, quote unquote, or a secular Muslim, or like, and be answerable for what was happening in the world. And that Islamophobia used to play out so subtly in conversations. Again, like I used to have, like I remember now, this is giving me these memories are coming back, where I was asked by one of my school teachers, and this was probably 11th or 12th grade, and he's giving a lecture on something, and he says that there is this word for an infidel that the Quran mentions, and he's not a Muslim, but he says this, and I probably was like halfway sleeping through his lecture.
And you
So
woke up.
he suddenly says no, no, and he suddenly says Maryam will know what the word is, and my mind is completely blanked out. I'm like, what is he asking? What is the question? And I'm gaping at him, and he's waiting for me to give an answer, and I have no answer for him. And then he says, like slightly disappointed or something, and he says it's kafir. And I don't even know. It wasn't even part of the lecture. Like he was an English teacher, and I feel like why was he like what was this expectation? What was this understanding he was trying to build? I have no recollection of that, but it was always there, like this prevalence of how the larger scale of this anti-Muslim sentiment or Islamophobia that was brewing in the world was constantly playing out in our lives as well. And at the same time, like you talk about this in your book, the different episodes of anti-Muslim violence and communal violence that happened through the course of your generations. How did Lucknow as a place, influence your sense of belonging as everything, like whichever categories you want to choose here?
See, Lucknow has witnessed uh, Shia Sunni violence, but luckily not a single communal incident. No rioting, communal rioting. Lucknow is the land. I mean, in the larger picture, the land that I'm talking about is India, and so much of it is Lucknow as well. So for me, Lucknow has shaped my identity and politics in many ways. So, if we were to talk numbers, Uttar Pradesh has about 19.2% Muslims, the Muslim population, which is more than the national average of 14 or 14.2%. But again, this is a very small number. We are a minority, but we have a significantly rich Islamic history going on in Uttar Pradesh, and Lucknow is the seat of that. So we were, and also, if we keep the rioting and the othering aside, Lucknow is a state that boasts of the Ganga Jamuni Tehzeeb. And I would say it still does that. It still is upholding that uh, waning culture that we boast of, but it's still there. So, uh, there are, of course, there are plenty of incidences where your minority identity gets highlighted, but there was a lot of you know just a regular thing about your identity as well, because there is a good percentage of Muslims there. They may not all be flourishing, rich Muslim families, but they're there. So I have drawn a lot of my uh, understanding of my cultural identity from the Ganga Jamni Tehzeeb and the cosmopolitan atmosphere within my house that I grew in. But like we were talking about in your previous question, there are a lot of questions that can make you feel othered, if I can use that word, in just 1 second. So many of those things keep coming up, and even if you're not living in a ghetto colony, or you're living in a more, like a cosmopolitan colony or society where there are many kinds of families from different religions, you still have that little thing about you being different, because that shows. But I would say that Lucknow was still kind of protecting me from what lay for me outside its little bubble. When I reached Delhi for my undergrad, that's when my Muslim identity actually struck me, because I started living in the IP College hostel, where there are girls from very small towns, smaller than Lucknow as well. And that's when the stereotypes of what people think Muslim women should be came at me. Like people would say, like, first you have to introduce yourself as a fresher, and that time ragging was still kind of just waning and it was still kind of prevalent. So, what's your name, fresher? My name is Nusrat, ma'am. And then, so, oh, you're a Muslim. So, Nusrat and oh, you're a Muslim became like this thing I would say in my mind all the time. So, it was like, oh, you're a Muslim. I'm like, yeah, where else will you find this name, Nusrat Fatima Jafri? And max to max a Christian family in Lucknow. Other than that, you won't find this kind of a name with a Hindu person. Mostly, right? I mean, I'm also stereotyping here, but I was so tired of this, oh, you're a Muslim. And after they would come to know me, it would be like, oh, they would reach a certain comfort level with me where they would start talking bad about Muslims in general, because they thought I'm not that kind of a Muslim, and I'm actually a league of my own. This Muslim doesn't exist elsewhere. So they would reach this place and they would start talking like, मुस्लिम्स में तो नहाते नहीं हैं, या उनके किचन बहुत गंदे होते हैं, एंड they just concentrate on madarsa teachings, all the stereotypes that are already there as people's beliefs. So I had to like face so much of that. And there was also a time where I was thinking, do I want to deal with this? Because I've stepped out of Lucknow and come to Delhi. I'm homesick as well, and I don't want to deal with this Muslim identity thing. So I also started staying away from my Muslim identity, and to please people, I would laugh at some of these jokes. Till like wisdom struck me a little later, and I'm like, no, this is not right. And then 9/11 happened, and that was so bad time to be a Muslim, as always. When I mean, like That was huge. That's when the famous "All Muslims are not terrorists, but all terrorists are Muslim" tagline just kept coming at you from all directions. And I remember going home on one of my college breaks, and I told my father that I'm tired of answering this question. I'm tired of wanting to know more about my religion. I'm just tired of being Muslim. And I could see he was so pained. He looked at me, he was silent, and after some time he said, "You know, what's the point of educating you if you can't take them on this question? If if a educated woman like you will not correct them or bring in a change, then what was the whole point of doing this? Like, no one would put you through that question if you hadn't left your house. And here you are outside, you have to answer that question, find a way." And I could feel the pain in his voice, and I felt he made sense to me that time. And that's when I think I started reading more about Islam, questioning Islam, as well as questioning the society that puts us in this spot where we have to constantly keep answering and smoothing all these little stereotypes that people have been nursing all their lives. So, yeah, I would say Lucknow was saving me, and Delhi kind of brought me in and made me do the adulting in religion.
Yeah, I think I had this experience while I was reading your book as well, because there were instances that you mentioned in the book, and I was transported to my own. And you know, for me, this is it has continued actually even now, where people would realize a little later after having known me that I'm a Muslim, and they will come back at me, and I no longer even entertain these questions where they're like, "Oh, I didn't know you were a Muslim," or "You don't look like a Muslim," and I'm like, your loss. I'm not going to like give this explanation. And I think we can go on and on about this, but it has roots in a entrenched sense of othering that has continued for decades in our country. And this expectation on a minority to be the model minority, to want to have no chip on their shoulder, to not have any qualms of their identity, to have no questioning around it, and just present themselves like, yes, they are like, uh, they are the fine ones, or you are not that kind of a Muslim, as if I don't know what Muslims are. And I think you and I again can talk about this for hours, but this is just like, we'll take long sighs and be like, this is
True.
just, you know, part of our journeys. And yeah, a lot of I think that is why your book also is very compelling, because it allows one to sit with all of those sort of crevices and those corners which won't be smoothened out. And it's important to sit with that. It's important to recognize that nobody is perfect. Nobody has like this perfect understanding of their identity of all kinds, and that is what makes human condition so varied. I mean, otherwise, how else would the humans? I don't know how humans would have survived
Yeah.
until this point, right? And I think I did find that a lot in your book. And I think while we are talking about this sense of othering that happened, um, I am, I'm thinking about conversion, and then this I questioning, and this choice of conversions is also a way that some people try to other and say that, oh, but you converted or somebody else converted, as if like you say, like it's some, it's so challenging for people to make sense of it as just a part of somebody's choice, you know and especially in the time that we are recording it, there is so much violence against communities, marginalized communities, that and there are laws being passed, anti-conversion laws being passed. Like, the ridiculousness of it is just astounding. And then there's also this entire love jihad which plays out with this complete foundation thinking that if a Muslim man marries a non-Muslim woman, of course the woman will convert. Of course the woman will have to like. make that,
Hmm.
as if a woman will not make her own choice.
Yeah.
So it's so deeply entrenched, right? Like the criminality, and I use that in quotes, and the violence that is this keeps on tagging conversions along. But again, like in your book, this is what I found so compelling, that you talked about conversions in a very quiet, assertive manner, done with intentions to that allowed them to be themselves. Whether it was your great grandfather or your mother. And I want to maybe just sit with that with you and wonder if you have something to share around it, because it gives a very different picture, and I think for anyone reading the book, it helps them really expand their own sense of when they think of conversion, what does that mean?
Yeah, I think the word conversions is such a hated word in India right now. I've spoken to liberals and hardliners and right wingers, everyone, they deny the presence of personal agency in adults for conversion. Like they are like, no, there would be some disguised expectation. A liberal once told me that, like, I'm sure your mother had there was some expectation to do this. And I'm like, no, if you, this is before I wrote the book. And I'm like, no, if you follow her story, you'll know that she was the one who was enthusiastic about this. Her in-laws, in fact, were like least interested. She even asked them, should I change my name? And my grandmother, I give her a lot of brownie points for this. She said, you were born with this name. Why would you want to change it? There was no Aisha or Fatima name selected for her, even for her nikah, or for, it was Meera. And it is only recently that my mother learned that Meera is actually also a Quranic name, and she's very happy about it. She's a, like I said, she's a devout Muslim. She's happy that तुम में से किसी का Quranic नाम नहीं है, मेरा है. So, so, but it's a very serious matter. There are people being killed in this country, and it's become so commonplace now that we are just scrolling down this news, because sometimes it looks like, oh, is this really a new case? Because it's happening so much, whether it is, and the Christian community has been bearing so much on this, so much vandalizing of their churches. Nuns are under, like constant threat, fathers, everyone. Uh, there was this case of two nuns traveling with helps who they had hired from an agent in a train, and they were stopped because people thought that they were tribal women indeed, but people thought they were taking them for conversion. Like, this is, anyone can suspect anything, and thanks to these conversion laws like the ones that Uttar Pradesh has passed in 2020, anyone can get picked up, because coercion is such a word that you can prove it, and you can say, with the promise of this, the promise of that, promise of marriage, promise of employment. It's never ending. That seed of suspicion can just keep growing. And I think one of the biggest reasons why I wanted to write this, and I may have mentioned, I think I have mentioned in one of my earlier interviews, when in 1999 the Graham Staines and his two minor sons were murdered. Then, when that incident happened in Odisha, I was shaken. I was 19, and I was just shaken because one of the repetitive words that kept in the coming in the news article was fear of converting tribals. People were suspicious that they were converting, and these people were working with leprosy patients who most people didn't want to touch. And if people were converting, my goodness, what a death these guys gave that family. It was so gruesome. And I started, like piecing words in politics and in society with my family. Conversion was such a common word in my house. This one converted to that religion, that one converted to this religion. And I'm like, this is flowing very smoothly here. What happened? And Christians were known for like bringing in very good education. There was a time when everyone was aspiring for convent education for their children. So how did suddenly everything turn? And it's all in many ways politically motivated, and it's that politics of this that interested me. So yeah, I mean, it's it's scary what conversions has become now, and it also feels like it's now it's an impermeable layer that nobody, it can, I don't think it, this word can ever be just conversion anymore.
Hmm.
And there's also this side which is there in the book about people converting into religions and almost never being accepted wholeheartedly, because people who have entered a new religion are also constantly trying to prove themselves, as in the case of my mother. But that's also sad. So I mean, there is this other layer to this which is also equally important. And as children of converted parents, you also have to keep proving your. I mean, I don't. None of us were interested in proving, but what I mean is, this is a thing which is like, like people throw things at you. One of the things that was thrown at us constantly was pride and lineage and pure lineage and mixed. And this is the problem, and this also stems from caste system in many ways, like pure this, pure that, is this purity nonsense. So yeah, so conversion is it's a word that can stick to you in many ways with your identity.
Yeah, you're right. I think I have, in my own sort of extended familial circles, I have come across sort of the hushed, sense of saying conversion, like kahin kisi ki generation mein hua tha. And it's almost like pata na lage kisi ko. No one should ever come to know ki they converted. Like this was what I have heard and experienced, that the question or this even the constant, not a constant, but like mention of the fact that at somebody some point converted is like, and I think, I mean, it comes also from, it's a very casteist orientation, it comes from this sense of pride and wanting to feel like you're on some order, you stand first. um, and you kind of did mention that, and I think I just remember reading that section where you talk about the Sayyad, non-Sayyad, conversations as cousins and within your family, and I was like, thank God somebody's talking about it, because
Yeah.
I have grown up around it, and I have different cousins and sides where somebody is like quote unquote a Sayyad, somebody is not a Sayyad, and who is a Sayyad. And when they're like, when it's were conversations about marriages, it's like a Sayyad family, and like you have to prove what is their Sayyadness, like how far back do they go. It it was boggle my mind, and the fact that people actually take it so seriously is another level of mind boggleness for me. Where I'm completely like out of my wits when people, and again, I think Nusrat, you're saying this right, like the layers around it are so many, because sometimes I am shocked by people who I thought were far more educated, informed, also familiar that this is casteist.
Yeah.
And then they'll throw this thing कि वो तो सैयद family है, and my I can't wrap my head around it. I'm like, अब मैं क्या इनको मैं कैसे मानूं, इनसे मैं कैसे बात करूं, like suddenly my system just feels very um torn, if I
Yeah.
if I could say it like that. But maybe for the I think benefit of our listeners, I think this question of within the Indian Muslim communities, I think I can only say maybe in the North Indian side it might be more. Um, this Sayyad non-Sayyad conversation, like this attempt to want to create a barrier that how are you a Sayyad, and whether you are one or not. And I think maybe the community is very far away from addressing it, or sort of working on a recourse around it. But what do you think is a way to even like acknowledge the fact that this has casteist roots?
Yeah, I think there's an urgent need to bring that out. That this is uh, this is a highly casteist belief, and I mean, I can see some people questioning it, but let's just say that more people are just so deeply soaked into the glories of being Sayyid and the virtues of being one and tracing their lineage back to Iran and Iraq. I think it's futile ultimately, right? I mean, if even if you've traced yourself there, what next? I mean, this is, you can feel happy about it, but it's a big problem. It is a big problem because caste only started showing its ugly face or revealing its ugly face to me in Islam when I started being more aware of it, because coming from a Sayyid paternal side, I, up till now, I was just struggling with the idea of how pure a Sayyid I was, and not that I was, interested in the larger meaning of Sayyid. I didn't know that it stands and that there is a caste connotation to this word. I just thought it's just a title that everyone's like trying to prove, oh, I earned it and you got it and stuff like that. But it's only later I understood that no, wait a minute, this is a sort of caste system that is followed in amongst Indian Muslims of the Indian subcontinent. Because being Sayyid is like being at the top of the order. I think both for Shias and Sunnis. I'm not very. I think it is, yes. So this is a this is like no longer the elephant in the room, but yeah, I think it begs to be questioned, and people should also not, I don't know. It's a thing that should be exposed. I mean, it is actually, like you said, marriages. People are looking for a Sayyid bride, which is like Brahmin looking for a Brahmin, which is promoting a sort of, this fear of diversity, basically, that we should all be the same, we should all, nothing should change. And usme adding these other elements, like we are pure, and you're one parent converted, and by virtue of just your father you are, these things are all, they're bad at the end of the day. And these are things that children shouldn't have to deal with, even adults shouldn't. So I would say that I'm happy put the question. I mean, I put stuff on that in the book as well, and I'm glad that maybe at some place somebody might read it and also feel the need to question it.
I hope so. I understand, like, if there is like a pecking order, this is not something that a lot of Muslims might be thinking about, given the realities that Indian Muslims are facing. However, having said that, I also feel like there is always a way to work in a manner that can help us be more self-reflective and introspect on how we can actually eliminate things that pull us back, distract us from the things that are actually important to look at. Um, Take away the momentum that can be built by having conversations and meaningful discourse that creates more room for um, just a betterment of a community. And I think across, I know, I mean, like, this is the first time I came across this in your book, but I know, like, there are books that people have written about, around caste within the Indian Muslims. There is literature available, there are debates available. So I think it's an urgent, like you use the word urgent. I would say I would agree with you that there is this urgent need to have access to that literature, sit with them, have that interaction, and actually challenge each other. And that is the way that I think helps one really embrace the identity that they come from, and recognize what it does to them, how it speaks to them. Otherwise, the forces are sort of like this overwhelming sense of Islamophobia, of fear mongering, of dog whistling is so strong that it leaves no room to actually for any kind of interaction. It leaves no room to breathe. And how else do we embrace identity if we don't recognize all parts of it?
Absolutely.
So I'm really, really grateful that you put it in the book. I think you talked about your cousins and this. I was actually laughing when you when you mentioned that bit about that your
The
cousins
candle stand.
candle set. It was
Yeah, no.
hilarious. I was like, okay, this is I could because I could picture it. I was like, yeah, like did they actually take a candle stand to be like a cross and just apologize for it? Like
Yeah.
it was funny. It was damn funny, you know.
Yeah, but it also, that incident also highlighted the fact that that like caste, your earlier religion will also stick to you. No
Mm.
matter, I mean, I've just noticed this, people have this big problem in acceptance. In not just converted people, but like in general also, people, it takes a lot for people to accept and see other people's efforts. So, I mean, this incident must have been when I must have been 13 or 14, and my mother must have been like fine, अच्छे से settled in the seat of Islam. Still, people are looking for motives of other things in my house, which, if you find them, is okay. But, like to jump to those.
Imagine, I mean, look at a candle stand and imagine to be it to be cross. It was just so wow. This is like some other level of like
Yeah, so it was star shaped. At best, maybe they could have assumed it was Jewish, but so it was like it had a star shaped thing with a curled up.
yeah.
I
Now,
don't know
now,
how, but
I
yeah, it
imagine
was.
if they assumed that was Jewish. I don't know what territory that would have gone into. Like
I know.
there is some secret religion being practiced here,
Cult.
cult. Oh God, like wow. And I think I mean I said earlier, but I at some point I mean I would love to speak to your mother as well if I get a chance because her story and sort of her you mentioned a lot about your mother and you've mentioned instances that probably you heard and learned from other people and she shared with you, but all of them stitch a very unique story about this person who was given the fact that she was a quiet individual. Her assertion was something that guided her and it helped her constantly make choices given the realities that she was with, and it seemed like she had this sense of her own north star that she was following. And I think that was beautiful. I really got so drawn in so many ways that you mentioned your mother and like also kind of imagining how your mother's own experiences growing up in her household shaped her choices later on, brought out a sense of what love meant to her and what um, community and family meant to her, and I think that was incredible. And at this point I would again highly recommend everyone to pick up the book who's listening. But your mother is also seeing the India that is right now, and she's seen the India over years. How does she respond to the country that she finds herself in?
Um, she is cautious because the political environment is such that it makes most Muslims and members of minority communities cautious. There is fear to speak. In fact, she checks me many times. She tells me to tone it down and आज तुमने बहुत बोल दिया है. You should remove that post. And why are you the only one who's wanting to fight this battle? So she's cautious, and I don't know. I mean, it's a little it's a very different India. It is also a new direction that our country is taking. Over the past few years, it has actually already taken it. So it is a different atmosphere, a lot of new things which may have been buried in our fabric that are surfacing. They're not entirely. new in their nature, but they were hidden. So now as they're exposing themselves, I would say my mother's reaction is of being cautious for the safety and peace of her people around her. And yeah, I mean that's that. I mean, I don't think I can add more to this. The times are, I mean, she's very politically aware. She reads, she knows. So, I mean, how can anyone who's grown up with the nation, the same age as the nation, not know the thing that we are in right now? I wouldn't call it rot, but I mean, it's new. Like I said, it's a new India. It's exposing itself layer by layer, and with flamboyance, like things are happening with a certain a surety that, you know, this is the direction we are taking and you guys deal with it. So I mean, the current electoral results brought some like a little glimmer of hope in my mother as with the rest of us. But in general, it's I'm also cautious with my words right now. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's completely understandable. I think it's uh, it's just the world and the times and the country you find ourselves in. Um, and I think you did mention this just now that I mean, you're right. Like your mother has grown up with the country. She's as old as the nation is, and I think that speaks volumes to the times and the realities of the country that she has witnessed. And I think I do want to kind of ask you about this bit that you mentioned of your parents having a big family, raising seven kids because of the fact that they just wanted to have a big family, and I think that's just so nice to hear, because given again, like, I think this campaign, which, I mean, like, you've mentioned a lot of things about it, but like there was this hum do hamare do campaign that started, I think, in the 90s, and before that there was this forced sterilization, which is one of the reasons why your mother chose to have a home birth, and then that had its own complications, like you mentioned. you know I know we've gone on this earlier, but I just feel this is something I do want to share and discuss over this conversation, is like, people are not, I mean, it seems like the majoritarian people who want to believe that there's this, that Muslims are the community that reproduce the most, and they, I'm not even go on and go don't want to go into the Islamophobic trope that we have come across all spectrums. But you have mentioned that you were asked this question again in college as well, like, this snide remark just thrown at you. Clearly these people are not reading the population health service. They are actually not following what is the
They're
current.
not wanting to read them. That's the
Yeah,
thing.
they they just want to live in that bubble where the way they think about the Muslims, and the marginalized communities, is the way they want to believe it.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not asking for an answer really, but
No, I mean, you're right, because one of the biggest stereotypes that the Muslim community in India has to face is large families, multiple wives. These two things, and yeah, triple talaq, that can happen to anyone, anywhere. Like, you're sitting at a dinner, your husband gets angry, he can just do a talaq with you. It's as filmy as that in everyone's perception. It is sad because they don't want to believe otherwise. Survey results are available. They've been available for a while now. People are people have interjected and corrected people, but no, it's like you listen but you don't want to believe. That's what the community is facing. I mean, the stats are out there, so there should be no debate on this. But yeah, that's something you have to keep on facing. Even now, when I tell people that I have six siblings, I always get snide joke or like some kind of a, it can never be like you ask me, oh, you have to react to that. It can never be, oh, okay, and I'm so used to this little reaction following uh, this question, how many siblings do you have, that I have sometimes I avoid telling people. So I like avoid this question because I'm not in any mood to listen to the reaction to this answer. And but like since we mentioned since you mentioned that my parents were both from big families as well, and I grew up, so I've seen it in my house. We have this, our house, our family was our community. We was There were a sizable amount of people in the house, and that was our community for the longest time. And because each of my parents had big families, there were more members in this community. So this one big community celebrating, mourning together. So this it also brought in a lot of comfort, these numbers. And of course I'm not propagating them. I'm so scared of people finding meanings in your simple statements that I'm having to clarify again. But yeah, I grew up with that comfort of that deep sense of community. And in the absence of having many children myself, I have made that community with friends. And of course, my siblings are also there. So I think that's what we look for. We are looking for that community. And my parents having a big family of their own choice is also, it made me feel really proud of them for standing up uh, to their sense of independence on making that decision. Of course, they knew it would be difficult. Each child is difficult and brings with them their own expenditure. But this is it. This is what they wanted, and they went ahead with it. And I was reading. I'm going to talk about something else I read in a Natasha Badwar's blog years ago about how she has three beautiful, lovely daughters, and somebody asked her a question, and she said that she has three daughters, and the other person reacted very weirdly that, oh, the third one is also a daughter. And she felt really horrible about that question, because why do people always assume that, like in my book as well, I'd written that my parents were definitely not chasing a male child because their first three children were boys. So this is like, you have to break your stereotypes in your mind and look beyond, which is something that as a society we lack. So like, okay, two daughters and the third one was meant to be a boy. That is an assumption. How are you making that on behalf of somebody else? It's horrible also to do that. So yeah, these are some things that are worth thinking deeply about as well.
Yeah, I think these are all very significant things to really ponder over. I feel like for the majoritarian community, they really need to assess how far has the propaganda played on their minds. And
Yeah,
it's decades and decades and decades of it. It does not have, I would say, a starting date. But I firmly believe there can be an end date to it. That
yeah,
if you really want to look at the country that wants to stand as a country that can, I mean, I don't want to be over optimistic and over simplistic about it because there's so many challenges, but the people really need to think of ideas around community and care and regard as things that are everyday rituals.
yeah,
They can't be taken for granted. They should not be taken as on face value, and they must be inculcated. Like I think it's so. I'm so grateful, like you said this bit about that you found a community because it makes me think of my parents' generation. Because I think now when I look back, yeah, I think their sense of community was built through their relationship with siblings and their uncles and aunts. They have so many names. I think we can again have this like so many different names for all the uncles and aunts with the specific names that only that generation can have. And I remember like growing up, I felt like I used to, because my mom grew up in a town where her maternal cousins literally lived a stone's throw away from our house. So like I think two of her mamus and then their kids and all lived so close. And I used to get so jealous of it because I was like, my mom would tell me these stories about like having summers spent, like it was literally like living in a neighborhood where you have no cousins. I was like, how cool is that? Like because I didn't have that. And I would just be like, yeah, seriously. And it was a big point of like I would just feel so sad whenever I was coming back from my nanny's place because I was like, this is so amazing. Like you have your cousins, you can literally like aapke like mamuzad bhai and all this live like next door. And there's so much history and stories and childhood spent together that they can write a book about it and it won't be enough, which is not the case for my generation, you know, because we were living in different cities. We could only see each other on summer vacations. And I completely understand when you say this, like for your son's generation. Like I think that's the reality of what a community is very different for me now. I know like I have friends and chosen family and things like that. And I think for your son's generation also, it'll have its own iteration.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I said. That my son also feels really jealous when I tell him stories of just me growing up with my six siblings, and how we would be a riot, and we would prepare for my brothers would be having their heats for sports events the next day, but we would be practicing in the house high jump and long jump. We used to have a big house, dining table chairs pe dori laga ke, like helping them. So these, and then when parents wouldn't be there, we would do wrestling. And so these are just stories of so much fun. And now, because all of us have just like, most of us don't even have that one child. Most people are child free, and three of us have this one child. So there is no sense of an extended family or cousins happening either. It's a total reliance on a community that we have built in and around our house with friends and families. So yeah, that is a bit of a struggle.
Yeah. I think you've kind of answered the last question I had for you, because we are talking about your son, and I remember I think in the conclusion you do write about that when your son is asked about if he is a convert, he quite convincingly states he's not, but his nanna is.
Yeah.
And I love this clarity that he has. I love the fact that he's so much at ease with it. Um, And I don't know if you want to add anything than you have already about like what's the hope that you have with the next generation about ideas on identity, ideas of how identity, religion, caste, community, all of them play out on one person. And how do you imagine that future?
I think this is a very important question, and there is no one way to answer it, because so much of your religious identity is to be discovered. I I grew up knowing grew up knowing my namaz and roza and everything, but I didn't know much about Islam per se. I had to read that when I grew up. So I want Dylan to have an atmosphere, an ambience in the house where he has the right to choose, and he has the right to question, and he also has the right to be fluid and change his opinions or come back to it. I'm okay with that, and I look forward to that. But my job is also to teach him what I know, because one of my sometimes I have this grouse with my father that he didn't teach me a lot, because I had to learn that later on my own. So I keep telling him that example, and I'm like, I have to teach you everything that I know, so that you don't say this later on to your therapist. And he's like, he's a child right now. It's too early to know much like organized rituals and stuff. But yes, I feel that as a parent, I am game to teaching him those things, and I'm also game to his rejection. If he tells me he doesn't want to do it, I will have to take it. But I like to, my partner, my husband, and I both have that uh, room in our lives for questioning, for denying, for accepting. You can dilly dally all your life, and I'm okay for that with that as well. But I want you to look into these things. And I mean, I would love it if Dylan reads and rejects or accepts, but he should read and read multiple. It shouldn't be like an echo chamber of, I think I'm a liberal, so my, I mean, please read, and I will answer questions that I can, and I would encourage you to read on your point of view if it's different from mine. But there is no escaping caste conversions, religions in the India of today. Like even in my epilogue, I've written that my son knew of my mother's conversion because he was part of my writing process. He knew because I would talk about it, and but I was surprised that that other little girl knew about it. Like she asked this specific question, "Are you converted?" And I'm assuming is because his name is Dylan, and she asked him if he's Muslim, and he said yes. He was very confused, and he said yes, and that girl is also Muslim, and she immediately said, "Are you converted?" I was surprised that she asked this question. And I was, of course, also surprised by Dylan's answer, but I was like, he's coming from a place where this conversation is happening right now because I'm writing the book. So, like I said, these questions will come, and we have to be prepared, prepare our children for the same questions about identity and answering the same things about religion that you and I have done half our lives, more than half our lives. They will persist. But yeah, maybe I can just prepare him to not get affected, to have that little space for people asking.
Thank you. I think those are very meaningful and hopeful words. And I think that is something that, because like you said, these questions will never stop. And so, really recognizing how one works with these questions and finding our own paths is a journey that I think is just um, it'll just help us know ourselves better.
Yeah.
And for that, I think your book offers a lot to the younger generation as well. I I do want to end on a line I read from your book. I found in your book, and I feel like that's a beautiful way to end it. I come to realize that in the India of today, I may be called upon to prove my Indianness to a detached government official. Carrying this amalgamation of cultural and religious heritage within my veins, I wouldn't know where to start. Honestly, Nusrat, I feel like you've started a tremendous journey with this book, and I think it's only going to go a long way for a lot of readers to reflect on it, to ask questions, to embrace it, and to just live with it in a way that makes us most comfortable with it. So thank you so much for the book and
Thank you
conversation.
so much. This was such a wholesome conversation. I totally enjoyed it, and I'm glad we ended on a hopeful note.
If you enjoyed listening to this episode, please review and or give us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to them. Nusrat Jafri's book, This Land We Call Home, is available across all major bookstores and online publishers, details of which are available on MBM's website. You can also listen to MBM's other episodes with Nazia Akhtar, Sabika Abbas, Sabah Khan, among others who expand the definitions of being an Indian, a Muslim, and everything in between. Thank you for listening to Maybe Muslim. I'm Mariam and we'll be back with another episode in a few weeks' time. Until then, take care, lots of love and gratitude.